Personal object pronouns in German replace normal nouns to avoid repetition in a phrase. They're essential for making sentences sound natural, but they're affected by cases, gender, and number. In English, the pronouns are me, you, him, her, it, us, and them, and they can be direct and indirect. A direct object is a thing or person that directly receives the verb's action, and it can be replaced by a pronoun, answering the questions what and whom. An indirect object receives the direct object, and it can also be replaced by a pronoun, answering to what and to whom. When it comes to German object pronouns, they can provide a different perspective on their usage because they're affected by the cases. Looking at the questions that specify direct and indirect object pronouns in English, we can tell that they correlate to the German accusative and dative. These are the questions that the cases answer, which means that German will modify object pronouns using these cases. In English, this system categorizes pronouns into direct and indirect because the language is fixed and specific. But in German, this idea is presented by the cases because they answer the questions for which the pronouns are responsible. The German accusative shows a direct object, answering what and whom, the same questions that English has for direct object pronouns. The German dative shows an indirect object, answering to what and to whom, the same questions that English has for indirect object pronouns. Essentially, the accusative and dative are responsible for object pronouns in German, asking the same questions. So German has grammatical cases that will answer such questions, which is why they automatically identify object pronouns. So, the accusative is used for direct object pronouns, and the dative is used for indirect object pronouns. As a side note, the German genitive doesn't have any pronouns, and it's something I'll explain at the end of the video. So, let's see what German object pronouns look like. Direct object pronouns in German are based on the accusative because they answer what and whom. As I mentioned, the English pronouns are me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. We can see that many pronouns change their form from their personal versions, while pronouns like you and it have not changed. In the German accusative, such similarities will be mich, dich, ihn, sie, es, uns, euch, sie. As you can see, many pronouns change their form, but the pronoun sie didn't. In the personal form, sie can mean she, they, and formal you. But when it's a direct object pronoun, it can mean her, them, and formal you. So context will tell the difference. This is what German direct object pronouns look like. They're directly affected by an action, answering the questions what and whom. Let's have basic phrases that work with accusative verbs. Sieht mich. Ich liebe dich. Ich kenne ihn. Ruft sie an. Ich nehme es. Sie sehen uns. Ich höre euch. Ich mag sie. Ich sehe sie. This is how German direct object pronouns work in context. And although the phrases are simple, their usage will show how they can be used with indirect objects. So, let's see how they work. Indirect object pronouns in German are based on the dative because they answer to what and to whom. The English pronouns are again me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. But just because they have the same form, it doesn't mean that it's the same case. Grammatically, indirect object pronouns work with transitive verbs and are written with a preposition like to or for to indicate direction towards something or someone. In English, their placement in writing may change, like saying, I gave a book to him. I gave him a book. Both phrases have a transitive verb that works with indirect object pronouns, but the first one is explicit because of the preposition which is tied to the pronoun itself. The second phrase is still correct, despite not having a preposition, and it does so because of the transitive verb. This is important to know because that's how the German dative functions, with direction. In the German dative, indirect object pronouns look like this. Mir, dir, ihm, ihr, ihm, uns, euch, ihnen, and ihnen. As you can see, many pronouns change their form, aside from uns and euch, so context will tell the difference. This is what German indirect object pronouns look like, but when putting them in English, they do not mean me, you, him, her, and so on. Due to direction, what they actually mean is to me, to you, to him, to her, and so on. This is the true meaning of indirect object pronouns, so it's something that is addressed to something else, answering the questions to what and to whom. Let's see some advanced examples with dative verbs. Gibt mir das Buch. Ich schicke dir eine Nachricht. Ich danke ihr. Ich gebe ihm das. Zeigt uns das Haus. Ich erzähle euch die Geschichte. Ich schreibe Ihnen. Ich helfe Ihnen. This is how German indirect object pronouns work in context, and it's important to point out their placement. Following the standard word order, indirect object pronouns are typically placed before direct objects, like gibt mir das Buch. He gives me the book. This is an accurate translation, but to give a perfect meaning, mir means to me, with direction. So, the correct meaning is he gives the book to me. And in this case, the indirect object pronoun is placed after the direct object. This is only applicable in English, but the point is that the indirect object pronoun is meaningfully more accurate because of the preposition. Saying, he gives me the book is perfectly fine, even without the preposition. In fact, many of the phrases are written without prepositions because the dative verbs allow the case to use indirect object pronouns. Oppositely, in a phrase like ich gebe es ihm, I give it to him, both objects are pronouns, and in this case, the order is switched. The direct object pronoun comes before the indirect object pronoun. Moreover, if the direct object is a pronoun and the indirect object is a noun, the direct object pronoun comes first, like ich gebe es dem Mann. I give it to the man. Other than that, the usual word order is the standard word order. Some other examples are ich zeige ihm das Problem. Wir bringen ihr das Essen. Ich gebe dir das Geld. In the phrases, we have indirect object pronouns and direct object nouns. And if we change the nouns to pronouns, the order will also change. Ich zeige es ihm. Wir bringen es ihr. Ich gebe es dir. To remember this concept, always know that in the case of pronouns, direct objects come before indirect objects. And in the case of nouns, indirect objects come before direct objects. This is how German indirect object pronouns work in context, but more concepts need to be known. To better remember when to use direct and indirect object pronouns, we can look at special prepositions that only work with the accusative and dative. For instance, prepositions like durch, für, gegen, ohne, and always use accusative pronouns, like sie geht durch ihn. Ich habe das Geschenk für dich. Sie kämpft gegen ihn. Geht ohne mich. Wir laufen es. Oppositely, prepositions like aus, bei, mit, nach, seit, von, and zu always use dative pronouns, like ich komme aus ihn. Sie bleibt bei mir. Fährt mit ihr. Wir fragen nach ihm. Ich kenne ihn seit ihr. Das Geschenk ist von uns. Sie geht zu ihm. Furthermore, it's possible to use is as a placeholder pronoun. Is can act as a placeholder in sentences where you want to emphasize an indirect object, such as es gefällt mir. It's pleasing to me, but the accurate translation is I like it. This structure is common with verbs like gefallen, fehlen, and passieren. Finally, I said that German doesn't have object pronouns in the genitive previously in the video, and now I'll conclude with this concept. German doesn't have object pronouns in the genitive because of how the case works in the language. Rather than act as a direct or indirect object of a verb, the genitive indicates possession and relationships between nouns, so there is no need for object pronouns in the case. Instead of using genitive pronouns, German uses prepositional phrases or simply rephrased fragments, like seine Meinung, his opinion. This fragment can be rephrased, like die Meinung von ihm, the opinion of him, using a prepositional phrase. Similarly, this concept is used in English, which may sound weird, but still illustrates the point. Historically, Old High German had more genitive constructions, but over time, the dative took over many functions of the genitive. As a result, the dative replaced many genitive functions with prepositions, so modern German prefers dative or prepositional phrases to show relationships. That's why German doesn't need genitive object pronouns. Overall, this is how personal object pronouns fully work in German.